All right, I think we have some great attendance here. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Howry from Exigent Technologies, and we are a managed IT services provider serving New York, New Jersey, Colorado, and Los Angeles. Thank you for being here today for this important webinar. Cybersecurity is top of mind for many people today for good reason. The cybersecurity business has become huge in terms of becoming a criminal enterprise. And you're probably here because IT is critical to your business and protecting your data and your privacy is top of mind. So today we hope to share some expertise with you at a high level, share one of our expert partners with you, and hopefully put you in a better position to be able to fight the fight with us. Let's go over the agenda. So first of all, we want to share breaking news on what's going on out there by way of our partner, SonicWall. SonicWall puts out an annual report, sometimes more than annually. They update that report. There's a lot of important information in there about what's going on. So we're going to go over those latest trends. We're also going to look at some simple ways to improve your cybersecurity hygiene, evolving solutions to combat hackers and ransomware, tips on improving your protection, and we'll also leave some time for questions and answers. We want to get started, but at a high level, we wanted to ask some questions. So Jen, if you wanted to put those poll questions out there, that would be a good time to do that. I want to remind everybody that this is going to be a high level discussion. So each of the topics we'll go over really deserve perhaps an hour or a day in themselves. I mean, we can go on for hours talking about different types of encryption and different regulatory issues, but this is not going to be complicated. There's not going to be a lot of tech speak here. This is meant to be thought-provoking and to get a conversation going. So hopefully you leave here thinking about some things that you are doing, are not doing, and thinking about how to tighten things up a bit to give yourself a better chance, reduce your attack surface, etc. Next slide. Oh, I don't see the slides. There we go. So again, SonicWall is a great partner of ours. We have a very long-lasting partnership with SonicWall, and they put out an annual threat report, and they do update that, I think, more than annually. And so we're lucky today to have John Phil from SonicWall here, who's going to dive into that threat report and give you guys an update on what's going on out there. John?
Hi, this is John Phil. I am a senior solutions architect with SonicWall. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for over 20 years. I have a master's in information assurance, and I currently hold a CISSP certificate. I enjoy doing these presentations with our partners and our end users. Talking about cybersecurity is one of those things where it's become like, oh, you're a doctor. Hey, I've got this weird pain over here. When people find out that I work in cybersecurity, like, oh, well, what can I do? There's hackers everywhere. Well, yes, there are threat actors everywhere. And today I'm going to share some information that SonicWall has been gathering with our cyber threat report. So if we could go ahead to the next slide. All right, and one more slide forward. Okay, so this is a very high level overview of where the threat actors have been focusing their concentration in the last 6 months. Great news is that the ransomware attacks have dropped. On the flip side, if you look at our cryptojacking attacks, they've significantly gone up, almost 400%. So what does that mean? Well, cyber insurance, they've done a lot of steps. They've forced their customers to take a lot of basic cybersecurity, cyber hygiene steps in securing their network. So ransomware, you find out right away that, hey, I can't get any of my documents. And as a result, it's a big, huge impact, and it's a one-time event typically. Whereas if you look at where it grew with those cryptojacking attacks, and well, first let me talk about what exactly is cryptojacking. Well, that's when you go to a website, and in the background on that website, it's using your CPU on your endpoint to mine cryptocurrency. And on a single PC, they're not going to mine any Bitcoin. But if you are looking at thousands and hundreds of thousands of computers all doing a couple computations, and it's actually a little bit more than a little bit of computation on your end, you may see a little slowdown on your PC. But on their end, they aggregate all that computational power, and they are earning, and they are making, not earning, they're stealing from you your CPU cycles and creating cryptocurrency. So there's a shift between the very blunt, in-your-face ransomware attacks to the very subtle cryptojacking attacks. There's a lot of individuals out there that they could be mining cryptocurrency for the threat actors for months upon months without even realizing. The only typical way organizations find out is when somebody will report to the IT that, hey, I think my desktop's working a little bit slower. But that's not even a really great indicator that you've been compromised and you are mining for the threat actors. Typically, the best way of seeing that is in the firewall and on the logs and what's happening behind the scenes. Can we go to the next slide? So I talked about the cryptojacking record surging, and the ransomware fell a little bit, but it's not down to zero. It's still a major threat that's out there. We're seeing that malware, and that's typically the regular viruses that most people are thinking of. The shift is going away from the U.S. as a whole, North America, but it's hitting a global reach. But we're absolutely not out of the woods. IoT malware. IoT is an interesting concept out there. People want the convenience of saying, hey, smart device, turn on these lights. Hey, smart device, do this really cool thing that makes my life easy. Well, the challenge is, specifically with light bulbs, people don't want to spend $40 per light bulb. And because we're not spending a lot of money on those light bulbs, the cost and the manufacturer cost has to be very low. So what happens is these light bulbs are relatively inexpensive. They don't have the cybersecurity features that we hope to have. And as a result, when they burn out, people think nothing about taking them and throwing them in the trash. Now you've got a threat actor that goes through your trash, because once it hits the curb, it's anybody's public domain. And it's actually very easy to go and get your network information off of these light bulbs. So malware that attacks these IoT devices, it's not overly complicated. Typically, these devices are set out on the internet directly or with just minimal security. Malicious PDF and Office files, and I'm not just talking about Microsoft Office, but the PDFs or OneNote or the Google Workspace documents. Offices, they run their business, and organizations run their businesses on these documents, and they've always been a good place for threat actors to hide their malwares and conceal and get the viruses into the organizations. Microsoft and Google have done tremendous steps in securing their spreadsheets and their documents. So we're actually seeing malware decrease in those specific areas, but now the threat actors are actually sending malware through OneNote. And overall, we are seeing an increase in the intrusion attempts. Jennifer, can we go to the next slide? And on this slide, we'll see in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, we are digitally dense, as the New Jersey State Police likes to call it. We have a digital density where, yes, we are a small area, specifically New Jersey, but there's a lot of computers out here. And New Jersey has a high volume of over 30 million attacks that we've had. And the malware spread is when you consider the number of malware attacks and those computers. So for example, if you have 10 million malware attacks in New York City, that's a very different number than 10 million malware attacks in Jamaica. 10 million malware attacks in Jamaica means every computer there has been hit multiple times, whereas that same 10 million in New York City, it's a lower number there. So yeah, New Jersey is very high on our malware spread. It's one of the top 10 riskiest US states that we have out there. Next slide. Now, SonicWall was able to gather this information because we have over 1.1 million global sensors located in 215 territories and countries around the world, and we monitor this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and we respond in less than 24 hours to these threats that we're seeing. When Microsoft says, hey, we've got a vulnerability in this product, we actually go ahead and create patches, and we do a virtual patching and add protection layers in through our endpoint, through our firewalls, through our multiple appliances that we have out there. And every day we collect over 140,000 malware samples, and we block over 14 million malware attacks every day. So I just hit the very highlights of this report. We do post this. We create this document twice a year, typically in the beginning, January, February, and then mid-year as well. We're going to be sending you out a copy of the full threat report for the mid-year update. It's a good PDF document, 50, 60 pages in depth or in length, and it goes into depth. And I just didn't want to drill down into the ones and zeros, but keep it at a very high level, show you some of the interesting things that our defenders, our partners, are using to make small adjustments to their defenses based on what's actually happening out there in the threat landscape. And I believe, Dan, are you taking the next?
Yeah, John, very interesting. The number well, first of all, my jaw is still wide open on light bulbs because admittedly, most people are not thinking to be cautious when they're throwing away their digital thermostat or their light bulbs, but those are pretty scary times. The other number that jumped off the page here was 140,000 malware samples collected daily by SonicWall. And I think it speaks to active management. Today, many things, almost everything, is being sold as a service. And we'll get pushback from clients because clients for the last 20, 30 years that we've been in business, they were used to buying an appliance. Maybe it was an intrusion detection device or a firewall. and setting it and forgetting it, right? It was kind of like your washing machine or your microwave. Yes, we have a firewall, but when you look at the slide and you talk about having 1.1 million global sensors out there and 140,000 plus malware samples collected daily, I think that speaks to the as a service model, right? Where you need active management, you need to be working on this every day, and especially with things like firewalls, it really is no longer set it and forget it.
You're absolutely right there. The set it and forget it mentality, that's actually what got us here. We need professionals that are managing your cybersecurity. I talk to a lot of people all the time, and I could do my own taxes. It takes me a while, and I could do it. But I've got a guy that does that. He does it in a fraction of the time, gets me more money back because he knows what he's doing. He's doing it every day, just like you guys at Exigent. You guys are doing cybersecurity every day. You know what the attackers are doing. You know how to protect your customers. You know what is important.
Thank you for that. Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk about some best practices. We're going to talk about some things that you can do, again, at a high level, right? We don't have the time to do a deep dive, but offline, feel free to email us. You are going to get an email from us with several things, but yeah, why don't we do a quick poll, Jen, if you had another one, and also see a couple of questions coming in. But yeah, at this time, I'd like to get my partner, Eric Burke, involved. He's our Chief Technology Officer here at Exigent. And he's going to start going over at a high level some of these things that are really important to reduce your attack surface and tighten up your cybersecurity hygiene. So Eric, over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everybody. Eric Burke. As Dan said, I'm CTO at Exigent, also our information security officer, also our cybersecurity supplement assessor. So there's a lot of different feeds that kind of come into my office related to cybersecurity. And the two things that came up kind of hit me a bit hard here on the relevance to what we're talking about. And one of them is the set it and forget it, the managed service. We hear that a lot. And the first thing on the list of best practices, and Jen, if you don't mind just moving forward, one is understanding what your vulnerabilities are. And one of the things that we gain as an MSP, or in this case, an MSSP, is that we see a broad range of examples, kind of like the threat report that SonicWall sees at a much more global level. We see what that looks like from a customer perspective. And so one of the ways we find that is we do vulnerability scans, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation, where essentially we look at what we're able to push through the network or across the firewall or into the cloud, and then gain that kind of feedback from what things are successful, which things aren't successful, and immediately turn those around and make them beneficial to other people. This came up early on with the particular tool that we use. It does it's kind of interesting thing where it passes a virus, or it's a sample virus across the network, and it looks to see whether or not we stop that virus from happening. And interestingly, in the SonicWall specific example, that the detection for that virus is off by default, because it's kind of a well-known thing. And so the first couple times we ran that for customers, what we realized is we really needed to enable us to tell whether we're doing the right things for them, is we had to go in globally and turn that setting on to detect that virus, because we were failing these tests for vulnerabilities, and it was something that we should have caught. So our managed firewall clients saw the benefit of that within an hour or so of us kind of seeing that trend begin. We can go through our management tools and apply a change like that to everyone else. That's one of the important things again, about our perspective is we get to kind of see and react to those and then implement them to everyone's benefit. The other one that came up was John talking about light bulbs, and I had an experience in my house, which, I run a SonicWall in my house. I have things separated into separate zones. I have IoT devices separate from my PCs. My wireless is independent. I have a guest network, all the things you might have in your office. Us tech guys tend to do in our homes. But I noticed something, is that's my cameras were reaching out to some sites in China, and they weren't update sites, and they were sites that you would typically stream to. And I only saw that because I had firewall policies that by default denied traffic from the cameras anywhere else. I need to look at them. I don't think they need to see anything else on the network. And so, having that visibility kind of taught us that we really need to worry about these things. We need to know what devices are on the network, and are they approved? Have we vetted them in any way? Is there some additional risk that we've brought to the network through them? So all that kind of goes to understanding what you have, knowing what your risks are, scanning for those vulnerabilities, finding the things we already know about. And so that's kind of the first step that we cover here is if you haven't done that, if you haven't done a risk assessment, or you don't have tools that do vulnerability scanning, we should probably start there. That's going to give you visibility to areas of concern that you need to address rather quickly. Where we also see that becoming more relevant is in the cyber insurance market. On my other screen, I have a questionnaire pulled up from a recent cyber insurance supplement. And what we're finding is that the insurance vendors are now asking all of these questions at a level of detail that we never suspected we would see. They want to know if you have an acceptable use policy that your employees sign, a data confidentiality policy, a BYOD policy, remote access policy, business continuity plans, incident response plans. And what they're doing is they're denying insurance if you don't have those things in place, or they're just simply making it unaffordable. So you really can't ignore the kind of fundamentals, and policies fall into that realm, because if you don't tell people what's acceptable, or you don't know for yourselves what's acceptable, you haven't thought through all of the tenets of it, then you probably don't know how to measure it and how to tell whether you're putting yourself at risk. So kind of the biggest thing for me, I say it all the time to our client base, is if you don't have these things in place, let's start with policies. Let's start with getting your stakeholders on board with what's necessary to protect the business, to assess third-party risk, to understand what user password credential management is, why MFA is so important, why we have to do security awareness training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's really the basis for every other decision we make. Otherwise, there's no rule book to follow. We're just kind of winging it. We hope we get all the right things that are important for you, but having a structured approach to that's really important. So scanning, assessing risk, thinking of your policies and procedures and training around the concepts of, like, what would an insurer, what would a third party be looking at from our business perspective if they were to audit us, are really good starting points for most. Also pretty simple, and something that everybody asks about is data encryption. Is that PC that you just threw in the dumpster sitting in there unencrypted, where that same hacker that grabbed the light bulbs, grabs the hard drive, takes it home, plugs it into a USB adapter, and that's it. Your data is now their data. Wireless passwords, which you just see here a poll. When's the last time that your guest or even your production Wi-Fi credentials have changed? And maybe even worse, is it just a password? Is it what we call a pre-shared key that protects your network? And how many people have that are no longer there? Have you let any employees go? Could they be sitting in the parking lot connected to the production wireless network because that key is 10 years old and it hasn't changed? You never really think about it. It's become such a utility that it's kind of fallen out of your purview. Those are the types of things that we can change easily. We can put in access points that have the ability to authenticate users against the network. That's a really important thing to do, so that when we turn them off on the domain side or in the cloud, we've turned them off on the network. We also want to make sure that, default credentials that maybe come with certain products, they aren't left in place. A switch, an access point, a router, they come with admin password, just like every other thing that you've ever connected to your network. I can't tell you it's how many of those we still find when we go into a new environment and we start putting our monitoring tools in. I'm going to say probably the most common thing we see is default credentials still out there.
Eric, if I could interject on encryption. So I think I don't want to leave people with the impression that, oh, well, we don't throw our PCs or our servers in the dumpster, so we don't need encryption, which, as you know, is not the case, right? You may very well need encryption and you have the safest, most diligent digital disposal standards. But what we see when we do our level 1 penetration scans, which we're going to offer at the end of this webinar, is we see private information that you would not believe. We run these scans with no administrator credentials whatsoever, and we end up finding password lists, tax returns, driver's licenses, and people usually leave the end of those meetings with their jaw wide open, like, wow, I can't believe you found that. So encryption also comes into play, without the whole disposal question.
Great point. And further, if you're communicating that information to others outside and you don't have encryption on things like email, or you don't have data leak protection around your cloud sharing platform, you can't tell if something with a social security number was inappropriately shared or sent through an email, then you're definitely putting yourself at risk. And the tools
are I'm sorry, Eric, one of the questions or conversations we usually have is you and I will ask customers, do you allow private information to be transmitted, meaning emailed, sent through OneDrive, whatever? Email's usually the biggest offender. And so some people will say, no, we don't allow that. And then I will peel back the onion a little bit and say, well, what does that mean? You say, well, we tell people you're not allowed to email, anything sensitive like that. But I think what we've seen more often than not is that when you check or the reality of the situation is that email is so convenient that people do send things through email unencrypted, which is one of the most, if not the most insecure way to send anything. People do it. And so we have to dig in a little deeper when we ask that question to customers, and we say, is there something preventing your employees from emailing a tax return, such as a program that's looking for social security numbers and other private information? There are ways to do that. It goes to the whole data leak protection question. At our company, if I tried to email a tax return, it would not go through. If I tried to email a driver's license number, it would not go through. So there are ways to protect against that. And it comes back to some of the things on the screen here, right? Such as, do you have policies? Are you using encryption, et cetera?
Thank you for that. I think the other thing that John, he talked about kind of the scale of these attacks and what methods people are using. What we didn't talk about so much is how those are communicated, and we see probably 90-ish%, and John, you may have a more accurate number than that, coming through email, usually through phishing attacks, where a very simple redirect to a bogus website looks very much like the one you expect. People aren't following those kind of security awareness training markers, looking for the domain not maybe matching the sender's name. We personally have seen a lot of customers, unfortunately, fall prey to the wire transfer requests. Hey, we got your order. We had a slight change in banking. please send that $50,000 deposit here instead of where we originally told you. And we continue to see that type of attack happening. And that leads to having controls in place to at least help others identify that you are who you say you are. Anti-spoofing technologies, SPF, Sender Policy Framework for email, DMARC and DKIM for email, which are essentially a reporting component as well as a encryption keying component. There's a lot of different very simple steps that you can take to just make sure that you're at least not the source of something that makes another party take a step that they shouldn't have. You know, someone thinks that email came from you when it didn't, because it looked a lot like your domain name, or it looked like a message you had sent them before. Maybe worse, maybe it was a message you sent them before, that one of your users was phished, their credentials were stolen, and now you've got someone in the back door that sees all those messages come and go. They've set a rule in the background that triggers a forward of every message related to that particular thread to them. And they're essentially just watching the entire conversation. Unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I've seen at least 6, maybe more examples of that over the last 2 to 3 years, where someone has just been in the background watching for that, collecting that information, and then stepping in at the right time. That person went on vacation. They know they're going to be offline for a few days, and the bad actor just picks up where that user left off and kind of finishes out the attack. Again, very, very highly available tools today that can be put in place to watch those behaviors, look for unexpected forwarding rules on email, things of that nature. Lastly, we'll talk about business continuity planning and the physical security of your equipment. You know, most compliance requirements will look at physical security as being as important as cybersecurity. Are the doors to the IT closet locked? Are the doors to the computer room locked? A lot of people underestimate the importance of that, but this is big business. And you know, you often have people might come into your facility that are there to work on the phone system, you know, and they walk into the telephone closet and there's a network switch on the wall. And the stuff that keeps me up at night is knowing that they could probably unplug some green lit port, which means there's a network connection there, pop their laptop in and be on your LAN, on your private network without anybody noticing. And so when I have, you know, customers that are saying, you know, we really can't afford that better switch, or we're not going to go with a SonicWall, we're going to go with this kind of knockoff brand firewall. I kind of cringe, because it's like, without the features that enable us to validate that those ports haven't changed, that we've got some kind of back end authentication between the physical network and the users connecting to it, it's really, really hard to know if you've got a secure environment. It's the same thing as the person sitting in the parking lot on your old wireless key. So we got to keep these things secure. And then when the worst thing happens, we have to have a plan to get out of it. So if you don't have a business continuity plan that essentially addresses each of these, you know, there's incident response, which is what do we do when something bad happens? And then business continuity is, well, when that bad thing happens and there's no way to resolve it, what do we do next? How do we continue to function as a company? And do we have manual plans in place still? Is that a thing? Do we have to have redundancy in all of these, you know, platforms and systems? Do we even have control over them all? You know, people are exporting things to the cloud. They're moving to platforms that they don't control anymore. And so third-party risk assessments and management is really important. You have to know how that vendor is going to be able to back you up when something bad happens to your data. Could be something simple like corruption, could be something simpler like user error. But you have to take all those things into consideration, especially when they're no longer under your control. So again, low-hanging fruit stuff. There's a lot of other things, you know, network segmentation, like the example I gave at home, keeping different types of devices from one another, so that if there is a well-known vulnerability in a printer, that's not giving someone access to your file server or to your HR server. Those are really common points of entry that we can protect against pretty easily. I guess, Dan, I'm going to hand it back to you for a second about kind of like next gen solutions.
Yeah. So the good news is there are solutions for many of these things. Just as the hackers are constantly doing their work, great companies like SonicWall and other great security vendors are playing that cat and mouse game, trying to stay one step ahead. The data and the numbers can seem pretty overwhelming, and it is quite scary. But the world has changed, and again, this is a criminal enterprise. It's a very profitable business for these hackers. And a lot of times when we have these conversations, people feel that this won't happen to me because I'm just a, insert small business, or, we're just a nobody, or we're just a small law firm, or we just make rubber stamps. Why would anybody target us? And we're here to tell you that that's not how it works. Eric, when someone tells you that, hey, why would someone want to hack, a 15-person company that makes paper clips? What is your usual response to that? Is Eric still there? Okay.
Sorry
So,
and didn't realize. Yeah, I was saying that the reason they probably become a target is because they thought what you said at first, which is that they would never become a target. A lot of these are targets of opportunity. There's robots out there scanning the internet for open ports and applications and looking for vulnerabilities. And so those guys who don't pay attention to that stuff end up having them. And so once you find that little bit of a crack, that's when the tools start doing kind of more automated penetration testing of their own. They look to see what they can exploit, and you end up on the list whether you should have been on the list to begin with or not. You're just a target of opportunity.
That's exactly right.
And we just see so many of those examples. It's disturbing, and I tell you what's more disturbing is then sitting with the CEO of that company who just had a cybersecurity attack, and their nest egg, their retirement vehicle, is just being destroyed in front of their eyes. And there's not a lot you can do about it if they haven't put these controls in place. You want to talk about really feeling helpless. That's a position I don't like being in. I can tell you it's not one you'll want to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the clients we have today, we have them because they unfortunately came to us in the midst of a ransomware attack or some other attack. Make no mistake about it, people aren't targeting you. What they're doing is using very sophisticated programmatic and robotic methods to scan thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of IP addresses and just looking for weaknesses. And those weaknesses are some of the things we talk about all the time, right? A vulnerability in an unpatched server, an open port that you didn't know was open. And so it's not that you're being targeted because you're being targeted because there's some low-hanging fruit there. So these statistics say it all. Small business is said to be the engine of America. So 43% of cyber attacks are on small businesses. We tend to see the ones that are make the news, and the latest one, which was really extreme, was MGM. There were people at the hotel that they were asking if the patrons can pay in cash. They seem to have it a little under control now, but massive breach on MGM. You can Google that. But yeah, small businesses are very much big business for hackers. One of the things we've been talking a lot about lately is DPI SSL, and it goes well with SonicWall. And DPI SSL We're not going to dive into it because it's very complicated. Well, it's sort of complicated, and you could do an hour on that alone. But it's a deep packet inspection, and what a lot of people don't know is that most of the traffic going through their firewall today is being ignored because it is SSL traffic. SSL traffic is the secure traffic that your computer uses when you, for example, connect to your bank, or maybe when you're buying something on Amazon.com and you look in your browser and you see the little padlock in the upper left. Well, that means you have a secure connection. Unless you have DPI SSL turned on and working on your firewall and configured correctly on your network, most of the traffic, which is SSL these days, is being ignored. So why is that a problem? Well, the problem is that the bad actors are also using SSL. And so that traffic is not being inspected. I think the easiest way I could explain it is, you know, do you want someone at the door just maybe looking at people, and if they look suspicious, you know, they don't really do anything? Or do you want someone at the door that has a, you know, metal detector and stops them and frisks them and searches them and does a background check before they come in? The latter would be the DPI SSL. It's something we think everyone should have. It's not a trivial project. There is work involved in doing it, but we certainly think it's worth doing and worth Googling. You know, Google something like, do I need DPI SSL or should I have DPI SSL? So yeah, let's go to the next slide. All right, and so what we get a lot of the time as a managed services provider is the question, well, I have you guys for this, aren't you taking care of all this for me? And the correct answer to that is sort of like, well, first the answer is no, we're not taking care of all this for you. Traditionally, IT services providers like Exigent provide a basic layer or an essential layer of cybersecurity. So for example, anyone who signed up with us has very sophisticated endpoint protection. We use the SonicWall capture client. We've also standardized or attempted to standardize all clients on SentinelOne. Those two pieces working together are pretty effective. We also provide web content filtering included in our price. But then it begs the question, well, why aren't you doing all of this other stuff for us? And the reason why is because if we did everything and one size fit all, no one would use us because we'd be so expensive, right? Everyone has different needs. Some of the people on the call I know for sure have regulatory compliance needs. They're healthcare organizations. We have registered investment advisors that have a completely different set of needs. And then we have some people who have no regulatory compliance needs, but their pure desire to be as secure as they can to protect their own intellectual property leads them to do many things that maybe a lot of other companies won't do, and they'll make some extra investments to add some more insulation. So the response to, you know, I hired you guys, or I have an existing IT service provider, I think they're doing all of this for me. That's a bad position to take. It's a very risky position to take. It's very much like saying, you know, my doctor is in charge of my healthcare, and she's responsible for my healthcare. And I go to the doctor and I smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and I never exercise. And the doctor tells me, well, you really need to stop smoking. The doctor can't make me stop smoking, right? Or the doctor can't make me take my medicine. So it begs the question, well, then what do we do? What we need to do is have a conversation with you if you're interested in this stuff, right? So everyone is unique, everyone has different needs, and we need to have a conversation with you about the shared responsibility. Another big thing is, Microsoft 365 or Google Workplace. Some of you on the call are considering moving to Microsoft 365 or are already on a platform like Microsoft 365. A big misconception out there is that because I'm on Microsoft's cloud, they're handling my backup and security. That's not the case. When you look at the actual documents and you kind of peel that back, you'll see that Microsoft also calls that backup and continuity a shared responsibility. That they say, here's what we're going to do, and here's what you need to do, right? Because they realize too that everyone has different needs. So let's see. Yeah. So our ask is that if you're interested, if you're concerned about any of these areas, that you just reach out to us and let us have that conversation with you and start a dialogue, right? So that we could understand better what your interests and concerns are. Over to you, Eric, for the sample of the penetration scan report.
Yeah, so the first thing about the vulnerability scan that we're offering is we don't do it. It's done by a third party. So even our own clients, we think it's important to show that, we're not assessing ourselves. So first thing is we do this through a third party company. And what we essentially do is we ask you a handful of questions about the facts about your business, the things about what policies you have in place, whether you handle personally identifiable information, whether you transmit it outside the organization. And then we send you a small executable agent that runs on a handful of machines as the people who are on those machines. So if they're an administrator, then we're an administrator. If they're a regular user, then we're a regular user. And we essentially look to see what information we can gather in that user's context. Do we see those tax returns that are in their OneDrive share that don't have passwords on them? All the time. Do we find a spreadsheet on the network share called passwords.xls that also doesn't have a password on it that we're able to open and pull results out and show them? All the time. It's frightening, quite frankly. Other things that we'll see, I mentioned the first one already, that we might see that we're able to pass data through the firewall. It didn't have DPI SSL or also known as TLS inspection turned on. And so we could pass a threat through it because to the firewall, anything that's encrypted is essentially gobbledygook. There's no thumbprints, there's nothing that identifies threats. So all the security licenses that you're paying for to have gateway antivirus, gateway anti-spyware, intrusion detection are really very, very, very hamstrung without DPI SSL because they don't really apply to all that encrypted traffic. And even worse, there's vendors, search engine platforms like Google that came out with competing encryption methods. Quick is one of them. It's kind of falls in line with some of the IP version 6 capabilities that don't use traditional TLS or DPI SSL, and as a result, they can't be inspected. We're constantly playing this game with the industry and the business community of, well, what are the rights? Who are we protecting? Are we protecting the people that work for the company? Are we protecting the company? And so there's always kind of new ways to prevent us from looking at traffic that's legitimately a business concern that could contain bad things, and balancing that with, well, what's a user's right to privacy? What do the policies say? We got to go back to that discussion. So we look at, can we pass those things through the firewall? Do we see passwords that we were able to pull from your local password manager? And you see some domain credentials shown here. We also are able to reach into a browser credential cache or the Windows credential manager and see, you know, as a user, I have access to all my passwords. So through some simple programming, we pull all those passwords and then we run them against a check of the dark web and see, well, are any of these combinations known already on the outside? Because if we see patterns where the same password is repeated over and over and over and over again, and then we see that that password's also been in 3 breaches out on the internet, man, is the likelihood of you getting attacked so much higher. And then we need to fix that really quickly. So this type of a vulnerability assessment doesn't take long. It's about an hour's worth of time talking with us to kind of prepare for it. And then, I don't know, probably 15 minutes to an hour to run the agent on a handful of machines. We suggest it be a decent cross-section, you know, not just line workers, but maybe an executive, someone in finance, someone in HR, enough that you'll get a good sense of, you know, whether or not you've got those controls appropriately in place across the business. You could move to the next slide, please. We talked on this earlier, you know, the as a service model, why we think it's important, you know, as we learn the results from each and every one of these, we incorporate them into our best practices. We have a technical SOP manual that is maintained by all of our engineers that's literally updated dozens of times a day. And it's every time we run up against one of these things that we could improve upon, it's an edict. You're not allowed not to do this at Exigent. Everyone has real-time rights to be able to update those SOPs and add these lessons learned so that the next one we do, we've already incorporated what we found on the last one. We're constantly trying to evolve our process to get better and better at cybersecurity and in general, just at what we do from a delivery standpoint to add consistency. So that's the reason that model is so important to us. Obviously, we make a living on that model as well, but it's because of the amount of time and effort that we have to put into it to maintain it, to keep people protected, the constant changes that we're pushing out that you could try to do by yourself, but I think as John said earlier, you know, that's why we have professional accountants doing our taxes, especially in businesses like this where things might get a little bit more complicated. So we invite you to talk to us. And again, if interested, I believe we're offering the risk assessment itself as a component of attending this. And I'll let Dan kind of talk about that, and then we'll close up.
Yeah, so again, we use a third party. We spend several $1,000s a month for tools that we don't charge our customers for. And so take advantage of that, right? We're offering you a free assessment to see where some weaknesses are. I would hope some of the people on this call, I'm sure, have already gone through that assessment. But because we're short on time, we'll go to slide 19. Oh, we're there. Okay. So yeah, we'd like to talk to you. Obviously, we'd like to do the scan for you and deliver that report for you. Jen, I think you were also going to show some poll results if you have them. And maybe, Jen, you could also tell people what they're getting after the webinar.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. We are going to send you a follow-up email after this, probably a little bit later today. In that, you'll be able to download the slides and also listen to the recording. So if there's someone in your organization you would love to share this with, you can do that. We will share a sample insurance prep checklist. So to Eric's point, the depth of questions they are asking is just getting more and more. So we're giving a little guidance on that. The SonicWall cyber threat report download link will be in that email. We're also going to share some of our blogs that go into some of these topics a little more deeply. And the link to request your risk assessment is in that email. We touched briefly on cyber insurance. Our next event is October 17th, and we're having a guest speaker come in. He is a cyber insurance and risk management expert. So we'll be having that webinar, and I'll have that login and registration information in there as well. In terms of the polls, let's take a look at those. So the first thing we asked was about passwords. Policies on passwords, BYOD, that sort of thing. 75% of you said yes, you had those, 25 no, so extra credit to the 75. It's definitely something that helps you set those standards, and then kind of be prepared to have conversations with a managed services provider such as us. We also asked about MFA. 30% of you said you're using MFA across all access points, 60% here and there, but not 100%, and 10% said very little. So there's obviously some opportunity there. This is my personal favorite. Has your guest Wi-Fi password been changed? I am really proud of everyone that no one had to check. I have no idea, because that's often the answer we get. 38% said yes, it has been changed in the last year. 63 said no. So to Eric's point, it's so hard to keep track of all these moving parts and really know that you're securing it. It's very much a moving target. So we're hoping that some of the resources we shared today and in the email will help you. So we also can take questions. If you guys want to type questions in, I have a couple in here already that I'm going to share with the team, but if you have any questions, just type them in and our panel will answer those. If you want a particular answer from one or someone on the panel, just let me know. But this one is probably, Dan, you can probably answer this one. How much does an internal penetration test cost?
Eric, you want to take that one?
Well, it
sorry.
depends. Yeah, no.
Sorry.
I was gonna say, so the one that we're offering is an internal penetration test. It's just limited in scope to a percentage of your workforce. We typically look to get from 4 to 10 machines, but again, that depends on the size of your organization. If you have multiple sites or you have hybrid users where you have people that work from home, we want to probably get them into the sample. So part of us, going through the questionnaire would be to figure out what that looks like. But it is an automated penetration test, and we're not looking to see if we can exploit threats. There's something that's quite a bit deeper. It's really it's a level 3 penetration test, which would be where we put an actual device on premise. We act and do things that are like a malicious actor who's gained access to your network. That can be thousands to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the environment, the number of sites that you have, what types of compliance, regulatory compliance you might have to fall under, because we may have to dig into certain areas deeper than others. So there's no real one size fits all when it comes to that. It's something that we'd have to scope with you. But the level 1 that we do and are offering as part of this will give you a pretty good idea of where you should focus those efforts, or whether you need to focus more on a broader scale scan. It's a great first step.
Great, thanks for that, Eric. The second question, you guys might need to provide a little explanation for this, but it also is related to penetration testing. We are an RIA. We are unable to get insurance until we have cyber awareness training and get a penetration test. Can you provide those services? So maybe we can give a little background on that and then answer that question.
Yeah, so RIA is a registered investment advisor. We do have clients that are RIAs, and they are highly regulated. And absolutely, we can help with cybersecurity awareness training, and obviously, as we spoke about, penetration testing. The free penetration test that we're offering for the attendees on this call will not suffice for that type of organization. You will need a formal engagement but we can provide that as well in terms of a full-fledged internal and or external penetration test. You would just have to reach out to us.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I'll add that cyber awareness training is one of those questions that we see often on the cyber insurance checklists, because, and we've all probably heard this, you know, your employees are not on purpose often your first line of defense and your first line where things start to go wrong. So that's a great thing to have and add to your staff training. This is a great one. Dan, you mentioned Microsoft 365. So can data on Microsoft 365 be attacked with ransomware? Probably Eric, John, either one of you could take that one.
Sure. Yeah. The answer is yes. It could be, and how it's accomplished kind of varies. You know, if you're replicating data from, let's say, a laptop or desktop PC to OneDrive, you're simply replicating whatever changes are made from one to the other. So if something gets onto that local endpoint and encrypts those files, then those files get encrypted and synchronized up to the cloud. So a good backup strategy is really the most important thing to have there, because the tools have gotten, you know, fast enough where that can get away very quickly, you know, where you could find that a good portion of your systems have been encrypted. The other thing is having tools in place to look for suspicious behaviors that also alert someone to the fact that there's weird activity going on like that. Maybe an unusual number of sync changes happening over a period of time. Because normally, if you're just changing Word documents and Excel spreadsheets on a regular basis, the rate of change is fairly small. If we're suddenly encrypting every file in your OneDrive folder, and that's being synced in the background, that's a very different behavioral component. Some of that will get caught by things like Fortify Edge, which is our capture client SentinelOne combo. That's built into our stack today. It may be caught by a security operations center sensor, where we're basically shipping logs from Office 365 that are looking at those kind of conditional behaviors and putting AI around them to see whether they trigger any type of suspicious flags. So the answer is yes, they could definitely be encrypted. You know, once somebody's on a device, it doesn't really matter where the device is. You know, all those infrastructure as a service and things like that, they protect the devices when they're down from bulk grabbing that file and being able to maybe run it somewhere else or load that machine on a different platform. But once they're online and you're into an active session, the access to the files is usually pretty unrestricted. So yeah, that is possible.
So here's a scary thought. Now, as a threat actor, somebody gets in and compromises one of your accounts. Doesn't even touch your office, your physical office space, doesn't even enter North America, but does this from Eastern Europe. They log into your Office 365 and they manually detonate malware, ransomware on their endpoint on another continent, encrypting all of your files in North America on OneDrive. That's happened as well. So yes, it can happen.
So we have a couple more questions. They're coming in here, slow and steady, which I love. So we have one about the DPI SSL. Is that a one-time project of configuring and setting up that control in SonicWall, and what is the budgetary cost?
Sure, I can take this, and this is it's a bit of a swag because it does vary based on the environment, and we have a kind of a white paper that we wrote on this that we can share with anyone who's got this question. But the methodology, the way we implement DPI SSL is essentially we first have to block the newer methods of encryption from traversing the firewall, and that's so that whoever we're talking to falls back to the older method of SSL encryption, right? So that's one thing that has to happen. The way we'll do that is we will block those for a group of users, a proof of concept group, typically small subset of your staff. And onto the machines of those staff members, we'll install a certificate, which is the certificate that the firewall will use to re-encrypt the data that it is going to inspect on your behalf. And that whole process is a threat in and of itself, meaning the firewall, the way it works is it sees you go out to a secure site. It essentially stops that connection and proxies that connection. It mimics you and now becomes the client to that website. So the certificate exchange, the encryption key that's generated for decrypting that session is now the firewall owns it. So it talks to whatever site that is. And I'm not going to say bank, because often we'll leave banks out of inspection because people have some concerns about how deep we can go. But let's just say you hit a secure website, it's your Amazon account. The firewall is now the end user. They get the packet back from Amazon and they decrypt it because they're now the one holding the keys to decrypt it. We then run all of the security engines against that traffic. We repackage that original packet and now sign it with a new certificate, the one that we installed on those test machines, and we ship it to them, and we tell them to unequivocally trust that certificate for anything that comes from the firewall, even if it doesn't match where they originally thought they were going. So they went to TD Bank or they went to Amazon, and now suddenly they get a certificate that was signed by the firewall, not some certificate authority that can vouch for TD Bank, because it's no longer TD Bank sending it to you. And you've got essentially a component of data that has been inspected, has been subjected to all the different inspections that we do, verified to be clean, and then passed back to the client. So that all of that stuff is a little mucky. It's a bit of a nuisance to manage. And what we tell people is average organization, average for us is probably in the 50 to 100 users. It might be 3 days of effort spread across 2 or 3 weeks, where getting the certificates installed on all the machines, doing the test groups, setting up single sign-on so that we can do membership-based checks, users or groups of people, not IP addresses, which is hard to manage. Identifying what applications don't play nice when we break their sessions like that up, and we act as a man in the middle, because there are a lot of applications, going back to the earlier example about encryption protocols, that don't want you to inspect them. So they've thrown up some roadblocks. We have a list right now. I think SonicWall has their own list. We combine the two. We probably have 200 or 300 that are common across our customers of things that break when we do this. So the reason for that stretched out timeline is we'll put our list into your firewall. We'll do a proof of concept with X number of users. We'll set up the single sign-on options if you don't have them, and then we'll watch and we'll monitor those clients for a few days to see, all right, is there any unusual behavior, or any of the system tray icons seem like they're not connecting to the applications in the cloud that they normally connect to? You see any little, red slashes or anything like that? We find out what the cause was. Is it they don't like DPI SSL? They've got some extra checks to see that the certificate that signed the packets wasn't theirs. It was our firewall that signed them. And over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we do a check-in. Might be an hour here or there. We add more stuff to that list. And after about, a month overall, we consider you to be in a fairly stable state. Hopefully at that point, you've run all those apps, all those things that we commonly find that break, we've addressed them. And the scope of that, again, ends up being roughly about 3 days worth of work on average for that size organization. And then it's upkeep. If we find that there's a new app that's very common, we'll push out a new exception to all of our firewalls through our managed service platform. If it's something you're the first ones to get, it's probably going to break something. That's where it's a little bit of a nuisance, but it's just one of those ones it's hard to ignore. It's kind of like, getting in your car and you have to put your seatbelt on, right? We know it's the right thing to do, because letting through all of this stuff completely without inspection is way more dangerous. It's way better to take that kind of short-term pain hit and allow us to put in the right exceptions here and there. Even if we put in exceptions for 1,000 sites, it's probably 1 million sites more that we're still inspecting. So it's not a terrible thing for us to have to do it. They're usually sites you trust to begin with. But it is a process. It is a bit time consuming and a little bit, it can be frustrating, to be honest with you. And the white paper we wrote kind of talks to what those concerns are.
Great. It's even a hard thing to explain. So I know that was a little bit of a long answer, but it's not a straightforward yes or no, or it's going to take 2 days. So I appreciate that, Eric. We have time for one more question, and I want to give everybody back a few minutes here. We appreciate the time you spent with us. The question is, do you offer an audit of Office 365 configuration? I'm guessing that comes out of the conversation we just had. So if we can give a quick answer on that one, then we'll let everybody go and thank them for their time.
Yeah, we can do an audit. I would probably start with a license audit, because the most limiting factor we often find for clients is that they're licensed in such a way that they may not be able to leverage what we think are really the baseline features that you need to secure your environment. And so to go further than that and look at all those details without first seeing whether you're entitled to those controls would be the first step. And then yes, once that's we've addressed that, we can look at some of the common things like conditional access and whether you're using mobile device management, whether you've got data leak protection. And it depends on how applicable it is to your organization, why you need to know what those controls look like, as to how we might address it. Ultimately, the answer is yes, we can perform that audit. We'll start with the licensing assessment, and then we'd go from there.
Yeah, I'd add on to that and close it up by saying that many times people are not buying the license that they need when it comes to Microsoft 365. So in the interest of time, I'm going to close things out by reminding everyone that everyone on the call is entitled to the free scan that we're offering. Again, we've made the investments. Take advantage of that. It's absolutely free. There's no obligation. Keep an eye on your email. You will be getting some stuff that you can review. And let's have a conversation. All of this may be very overwhelming to someone who is not technical. So I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible. All you need to do is pick up the phone or shoot us an email and say, I'd like to take a deeper dive into cybersecurity. It's absolutely free. We'll sit down with you virtually or in person, take a look at your environment, your regulatory needs if they exist, and offer up sound advice. Some of the things that you may need to do are extremely easy. Others may not be so easy, but I think it all starts with a conversation. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone for attending, and hopefully you will register for our Cyber Insurance Decoded webinar, which is coming up on October 17th. I know our subject matter expert, Jim Venezia, will have some amazing information to share on that ever-changing topic. So thank you very much, and we'll